In December 1893, millions of readers across London opened their Strand magazines to discover something unthinkable. Sherlock Holmes was dead, thrown into the misty chasm of Reichenbach Falls by his creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. But this was not merely an author ending a fictional story. It was a desperate execution driven by an unseen force that threatened to destroy Doyle's real life. To understand who truly framed Sherlock Holmes, we must journey back to the dark cobblestone avenues of 221B Baker Street. What began as a clever literary exercise quickly turned into a terrifying psychological obsession. Doyle found himself overshadowed by a fictional detective who seemed to possess a mind of his own, speaking through the pages with uncanny real-world precision. The public reaction to the detective's sudden death was swift, chaotic, and unprecedented in modern history. Young businessmen wore black silk armbands throughout London, while fanatical letters poured into publisher offices containing raw grief and furious death threats. People refused to accept that Holmes was just ink on paper, demanding to know the shadowy truth behind his mysterious demise. Behind the curtain, powerful syndicate bosses and magazine moguls held immense leverage over Arthur Conan Doyle. Millions of pounds were riding on the continuation of the Holmes stories, turning creative writing into a lucrative golden cage. Yet Doyle secretly despised his famous sleuth, claiming that Holmes kept his mind away from higher, spiritual literary pursuits. Strange historical documents reveal that mysterious shadowy figures began approaching Doyle shortly before he attempted to kill off the detective. Secret societies, political operatives, and high-profile government figures were referencing subtle details in the stories that mirrored real intelligence secrets. Was Holmes inadvertently uncovering real covert schemes, making the fictional character a legitimate threat to powerful men? The strange boundary between fiction and reality began to warp in ways Doyle could never have anticipated. Devoted readers started sending actual crime evidence and real murder cases directly to Baker Street, begging the fictional detective for help. Doyle unexpectedly found himself acting as a real-life investigator, solving cold cases to clear innocent men who were unjustly framed. In one remarkable real-world case, Doyle utilized rigorous Holmesian deduction to save Oscar Slater, an innocent man framed for brutal murder by corrupt legal authorities. As Doyle immersed himself deeper into real criminal underworlds, he realized how easily human lives could be ruined by hidden forces. His fiction had transformed into a lens exposing systemic corruption across high society. Yet the unfolding mystery grew much darker when Doyle realized he was no longer in total control of his own narrative. Whispers in London literary circles suggested that another author was secretly ghostwriting portions of the Holmes canon, or that Doyle was channeling real spiritual entities. The line between literary genius and helpless puppet was beginning to blur completely. Arthur Conan Doyle's intense obsession with spiritualism introduced a bizarre twist to the Sherlock mystery. He became deeply convinced that dead spirits could communicate through automatic writing, leading many contemporaries to question if the detective was born from otherworldly guidance. Was Holmes framed not merely by human greed, but by mysterious spiritual forces directly manipulating the author's pen? When Doyle finally staged the fatal confrontation at Switzerland's dramatic Reichenbach Falls, he believed he was at last free from his phantom tormentor. The roaring mountain water cascaded down treacherous rocky cliffs, swallowing both Holmes and Professor Moriarty into the dark abyss. But the abyss refused to keep its quiet secret, echoing with demanding voices that refused to let Holmes die. The sudden financial collapse following Holmes's death sent massive shockwaves through the Victorian publishing industry. The Strand magazine lost over 20,000 subscribers almost overnight, plunging the entire company toward economic bankruptcy. Pressure mounted relentlessly from corporate boardrooms and furious readers alike, forcing Doyle to confront an alarming reality. He could not destroy an idea that owned the public mind. An enigmatic, dynamic figure soon entered the theatrical scene, American actor and talented playwright William Gillette. Gillette purchased the international stage rights to Sherlock Holmes and took complete creative control, altering the character's iconic look forever. It was Gillette who introduced the curved pipe and the famous phrase, "Elementary, my dear Watson," completely redefining Holmes without Doyle's direct consent. Arthur Conan Doyle watched in silent astonishment as his creation slipped entirely from his control, rapidly morphing into a global commercial franchise. The character was no longer a personal artistic expression, but an immortal public brand manipulated by theater managers, publishers, and enthusiastic fans. Sherlock Holmes had become far larger than life, effectively framing Doyle as a helpless custodian. Finally surrendering to immense financial offers and relentless public hysteria, Doyle reluctantly agreed to bring the detective back to life. In 1901, he published The Hound of the Baskervilles, setting the narrative before the fatal fall. The terrifying tale of a spectral demon hound on the desolate Dartmoor fens captivated millions of readers and broke all literary sales records worldwide. The massive success of the new novel proved that Sherlock Holmes was an unstoppable force that could easily overcome death itself. But beneath the Gothic atmosphere lay subtle clues suggesting Doyle was using the story to transmit hidden messages. Was Doyle dropping warnings about the dark psychological cost of being permanently enslaved by one's own famous masterpiece? Modern investigators of literary history have uncovered strange parallels between Holmes's cases and real unsolved crimes of the Victorian era. Some scholars argue that Doyle used his published stories as coded critiques of real political scandals that the British government worked tirelessly to cover up. Sherlock was intentionally framed to appear as fiction to conceal dangerous real-world truths. As the passing years progressed, Doyle's personal connection to the detective character grew increasingly strained and deeply complex. He desperately attempted to overshadow Holmes by publishing ambitious historical novels and spiritual treatises, but the public cared for nothing except Baker Street. Doyle realized he had constructed an inescapable creative prison, and his own fictional creation held the master key. In a remarkably bizarre turn of historical events, secret government files released decades later revealed that British military intelligence had actually consulted Arthur Conan Doyle during World War I. They utilized his logical frameworks to analyze enemy spy networks, proving that the deduction methods created for Sherlock Holmes were being actively employed in high-stakes, real-world international espionage operations. The ultimate dark irony of the Sherlock mythos is that the fictional detective successfully framed his own creator for eternity. Doyle desperately wanted to be remembered as a serious military historian and spiritual pioneer, yet history ultimately reduced him to the man who wrote Sherlock Holmes. The fictional sleuth stepped out of the pages and eclipsed the living author entirely. Even after Sir Arthur Conan Doyle passed away in 1930, the unseen hand shaping Sherlock Holmes continued to move vigorously across global media. Radio dramas, early black-and-white motion pictures, and theater plays continually reshaped the detective, stripping away original context and inventing iconic traits that Doyle himself had never penned, keeping the fictional legend perpetually alive. The legendary detective ultimately became the first modern character to completely transcend copyright, fan culture, and authorial ownership. Devoted fans formed secret literary societies like the Baker Street Irregulars, playing the grand game, treating Holmes as a genuine living historical figure, and Doyle merely as Watson's humble literary agent. The line between fact and fiction was erased forever. So who truly framed Sherlock Holmes in the end? It was not Professor Moriarty on the perilous cliff ledge of Reichenbach Falls, nor was it the desperate pen of Arthur Conan Doyle. Holmes was framed by the collective human imagination, a relentless cultural appetite that demanded an immortal symbol of pure logic in a chaotic modern world. The mysterious unseen hand was ultimately the unstoppable power of myth-making itself, transforming a simple detective story into an immortal cultural archetype that no single creator could ever control or destroy. Doyle attempted to murder his creation, but the world adamantly refused to let him die, choosing instead to make Holmes eternal while forever framing his creator. Today, as thick, heavy fog settles over the real Baker Street, the ghost of Sherlock Holmes still walks triumphantly through our collective human psyche. The brilliant detective who was never born continues to solve the darkest mysteries of our world, reminding us that sometimes the most powerful force in human history is an unkillable idea. The game is forever afoot.